Thank Thank you for joining us today at a special webinar hosted by the First Nations Health and Wellbeing Lowitja Journal. Today's session is all about peer reviewing, why it matters, how to do it well, and how we can strengthen First Nations-led research through culturally safe and rigorous review practices. We're incredibly lucky to be joined by two respected leaders in the field, one of our editors-in-chief, Professor Catherine Chamberlain, and Professor Karen Adams. Both have made outstanding contributions to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health research, and they bring a wealth of experience to peer review and academic publishing. This session is an opportunity for you to learn from their insights, ask questions, and build some confidence in contributing to the peer review process. So thank you all again for being here, and I'll hand over to our speakers.
Thanks so much, Christy, and thanks everyone for joining. So, peer reviewers are the absolute backbone of the journal and really supporting Indigenous researchers to publish their really important research. We're really conscious that peer reviewers volunteer all your time to peer review articles, and it's a critical part of supporting Indigenous researchers and early career researchers. So I'm Professor Kath Chamberlain. I'm a Trawlway woman from Tasmania and public health researcher and midwife, and I'm working for the Lowitja Institute and also based at the University of Melbourne in the School of Public Health. And I'll just pass over to Karen to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Karen. I'm Wiradjuri, and I'm based at Monash University in the Gugwanduruk Indigenous Health Workforces Centre, and it's a privilege to be here today.
Thanks, Karen. So we'd just like to start by acknowledging the country that we're dialing in from today. So I'm calling in from Wurundjeri country here in Naarm in Melbourne, and Karen's calling in from Bunurong country in Melbourne. And we want to pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge the important role of Indigenous knowledges in all of the work that we do, and that has been passed down for tens of thousands of years. And extend that respect to the elders of the countries that all of you are dialing in from today, and acknowledge all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today, and our allies as well. So as Christy said, the overview for today is to give a bit of an overview really quickly about the Lowitja Journal and some of the author guidelines that we have, and then give a bit of a context for Lowitja Journal reviewing and some of the main issues that we need to look out for. And then we're going to talk about key steps for reviewing manuscripts, with a particular focus on some of the things that we look for in manuscripts that are submitted to the Lowitja Journal. And then we'll share some further resources and training as well. So first of all, just briefly, a bit of an overview of the Lowitja Journal. So we're a First Nations Health and Wellbeing, the Lowitja Journal. It's the official journal of the Lowitja Institute. It's Australia's first community-controlled research institute. We're an international journal. It's community-controlled. We report to the board of Lowitja own it. It's inter and multidisciplinary peer reviewed, and it's open access, so people don't have to pay to access the articles that are published. And we're really dedicated to expanding access to First Nations research across the world. We focus on all different sorts of papers, primary research, systematic reviews, informed short reports, and community contributions as well, on anything related to health and wellbeing. These are some of the article types. We've got quite a generous word count, up to 7,000 words for original research, 10,000 words for review articles, and then some shorter articles as well that can be contributions. We also invite things like book reviews, letters, or personal reflections or opinions that are short, or practice case studies. So some of the specific topic areas that people send in are around the social and cultural determinants of health, medicine, epidemiology, anthropology, Indigenous data governance and healthcare delivery and evaluation, obviously things like closing the gap and policy directions in health, a whole range of health issues, including things like climate change, decolonisation, capacity building, and addictions. And there's a special issue coming out this year around self-determination in health, which the other co-editor-in-chief, Moana Watoki, is leading development of that. So we've got some really quite unique author guidelines with some of the requirements that we have. So we really want a First Nations lens in all the research. That's what's unique about our journal, having that specific perspective, and we need that to be authentic. So all papers submitted to the journal must have substantive contributions from First Nations authors. That's either as first, second, or last senior author Indigenous, recognising that there's a lot of senior researchers now that have that lead teams where there's some non-Indigenous researchers. So we welcome papers from First Nations researchers from all over the world. We invite, it's not compulsory, but we offer the opportunity for authors to include a biography in the article, so that just to establish positionality and the lens that you're talking from. We offer an opportunity for people to have their cultural identities included after your name right at the top of the publication. And we ask people to put in highlights or implications of the research included. So submissions will be peer reviewed by experts in the field. And so while we have a all Indigenous editorial board, we do invite peer reviews from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous reviewers. And authors also should include a statement that informed consent was obtained for any research, and we just have a single anonymous peer review process. So the reviewer is anonymous, but the authors aren't. We have also a requirement that every article submits a consider statement with their paper and identifies where in the paper that all the specific issues outlined on the consider statement are addressed or not, or to specifically note if they're not. We've had a whole series of these webinars that Christy organises. There's a picture of some of them here, and you can go to our website, and there's also a lot of information on the Researcher Academy to look at about reviewing. So just a bit of brief context for the reviewing. I'll pass over to you, Karen, for this next bit to talk about the context.
Thanks. You tell a great story about why this journal's so amazing and brilliant. So, and there is some context for the journal as well that I think is really important to acknowledge up front, and that is that the reviewers are often dealing with two different sort of knowledge systems, and we can't really go into these in depth today, and I'm sure there's a lot of people online who know a lot about these knowledge systems already. However, I think what's important is that for this journal, we're dealing with both of these knowledge systems, and that can bring up some interesting sort of ideas and thoughts for people to engage with in the reviewing process about what that means. And I think a lot of other journals probably don't deal with these two knowledge systems as much as this journal does. So part of reviewing for the Lowitja Journal is understanding that these knowledge systems exist, and they're quite disparate. And a really great article to read if you're interested in learning more about this is Martin Nucketa's Cultural Interface article, which was published in 2007. Thanks, Kath. The next slide. So in terms of review and feedback, we've got these two knowledge systems that differ, and they not only differ in terms of sort of broader understandings of the world, but they also differ in how peer review actually happens. So Indigenous knowledge often involves ways of reviewing or giving feedback, and these mechanisms can be thousands of years old, many thousands of years old. They commonly involve sophisticated forms of relational guidance, mentoring, listening, and storying. Some brief examples are elders sharing generational knowledge and skills and assisting to develop younger people's relational abilities, particularly reciprocity, And a further example is in North America, involving Two-Spirit people who traditionally hold, amongst many roles, roles in the communities as mentors and educators. Additionally, review and feedback can also come from non-human forms, such as listening to feedback from country to guide decision-making. In contrast, Western or colonial knowledge of peer review is frequently thought to have emerged in the 17th century with the establishment of the Royal Society. Here, mostly European men peer-reviewed each other's written and published scientific research, and you could say that that's a slight conflict of interest, but and I guess that was generated through sort of Western and colonial knowledge systems. So the purpose was to assess selection of pre-publication articles for publication. So Western or colonial peer review began with an underpinning of gross inequity, largely excluding voices and perspectives of women and minority groups such as Black, Indigenous, people of colour, people with disabilities, and people from the LGBTIQ plus communities. So today, inequities in peer review processes are still acknowledged as occurring, and people are really trying to work out how to address that. And I guess another sort of, there's a few sort of cultural tensions as well for Indigenous people in peer review, and Cass and I have talked about this quite a lot. Just for younger Indigenous reviewers reviewing older or respected Indigenous people's works, I think that that can bring up some particular tensions that needs to be acknowledged. And for non-Indigenous reviewers as well, how do you practice cultural humility and lifelong learning and simultaneously provide peer review for Indigenous authors? So it is within this context that we're trying to create peer review of Indigenous health research and build a better future. Next slide, Kath. There are also some guidelines around AI for the journal as well for authors, editors and reviewers. So authors can use AI to improve readability and language if undertaken with human oversight, and that use of AI needs to be disclosed during the submission. The editors don't use AI to assist in the review, and reviewers shouldn't use AI for several reasons, actually, including author confidentiality and privacy. So they're, in the new world we operate in, some things to think about for the review process. Next slide, Kath. There's quite a few, the journal rejects quite a few papers. Kath, what's the percentage of papers that gets rejected?
Around 50%.
Around 50%. Mm. So, and that's at desktop. So that's the editors checking the article before it even comes to the peer review process. So these are some common reasons for articles being rejected. And so they're really good things to look out for as reviewers as well, and to think about also if you're an author. Next slide. So we'll get into some key steps for reviewing. So there's lots of reasons to be a reviewer. You get to contribute to Indigenous communities and show relational accountability. It's a really helpful allyship opportunity. If you're an ally out there and you're looking for ways to try and strive to be an ally with Indigenous people, reviewing is a great opportunity for you to do that. You can support development of early and mid-career researchers and help grow the next generation of Indigenous health researchers, which is a really important role. You can review a research topic, and this can add to your lifelong learning, and you can get to cite that paper if it's of relevance and interest to your field. And you can add to your CV that you've been a Lowitja Journal reviewer as well. So there's lots of good reasons to get involved. Next slide, Kath. So once you've been invited to review, then what happens? Well, read the abstract and material carefully, decide if the paper's in your field of expertise or not. You might also have a conflict of interest, and I think this is another unique thing for Indigenous health research is we usually all know each other. So if you're not sure if you have a conflict of interest, you can check with the editor. And you also need to think about whether you have time to review the paper. So accept or decline the review as soon as possible so the authors can get a timely review, and editors don't mind if you decline. We actually very value quick declines because we don't want the paper hanging around and authors, having to wait for people to respond to things. So don't be ashamed about declining. Next slide, Kath. So the first thing I usually do is do an initial read of the paper. So I'll think about, what is the purpose of the paper? What is the research aim or question? And has this been answered? Whether the research design and methods are clear and relevant, and whether the author's arguments are clear. So, and also looking at, the structure of the paper as well. And we want happy reviewers. We've got an example of a happy reviewer here, and this is what you should look like when you're reviewing. And then I usually put the paper away, and I might think about it overnight or over a couple of nights and then come back to it. And I'm going to hand over to Kath to do tell us about the next steps.
Thanks, Karen. That's been great to get the context and initial reading. So the next step is to give it a really careful read through. So it's not the editor's, well, the reviewer's responsibility to go through and sort of, really check every grammatical error and all of that kind of thing. There's other people that can do that, although often I notice that reviewers do that as they're going through, which, the authors really obviously appreciate. But I just wanted to say, you don't have to do things quite down to that level of detail unless you really want to. So the first thing to do is, I usually set up a Word doc, and just so that I can go through it all carefully and make some notes as I'm going through, and then structure it, structure the reply accordingly. So we check the introduction first of all, and just check, does it kind of read clearly and provide a well-organised approach of people, because we're really thinking about the reader here, and is it going to make sense to the wide audience? Is there a really clearly stated research question or an aim of the paper, if it's not a research article? Whether it makes a coherent case for why the research is needed, why this is important. Does it sort of funnel down the background into, making it, helping people understand why this is an important research paper? We also check whether there's relevant work that's cited, and, people can check all that. We certainly don't ask, what we don't want is reviewers asking authors to cite their work. That's something that we really try to avoid, but certainly citing relevant work. We also ask people to sort of introduce and put into perspective what follows in the manuscript, so that it's signposting people and just, again, helping the reader through the research article. Then we go through the methods section, and really thinking about whether the methods are described clearly enough. And of course, not all the papers that we get have a method section, but for those that are research articles, we check this. And the aim of the methods section in a research article is so that somebody can come along and reproduce the research if they need to. That's part of the rigor of putting in the methods. So we check whether there's any new methodology that's completely and accurately and appropriately described. And this is, I think, really important in Indigenous research, because a lot of people don't understand Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous methodologies. And so it's really important to kind of clearly explain what you're doing and why, and really carefully, because that's part of the aim of this journal, is to share some of that knowledge. And also it's important that we, can ensure that those methodologies are being applied appropriately, because, what we don't want is just the sort of jargon about it and then it not being authentically, practiced in the journal, in the research. We check whether it seems an appropriate method to answer the research question that's been going on. You need to do that. The you need to provide the methods, check that it provides enough information to be rigorous and defensible, that the ethics approval is there, whether it's human and or animal, and whether it describes the data that's been collected in accordance with accepted practice. And also if there's any supplementary material that can be provided to assist readers. Sometimes you don't have the space to put in detailed methods, and there can be other tools like tables that have been used, or data extraction forms, or search strategies and things like that that can really help assist the reader. Then we need to look at the results. So we check, do the results report the results of the experiments or analyses that's described in the methods, whether there's any additional results that are not described in the methods, because that's something that we need to suggest that people go and include. Are they, what the methods were for those results, whether the results are presented clearly and consistently, and do the checking of things like the figures and the text matching up, and making sure that it's accurate. And then thinking about whether there's any suggested improvements in the way that the data is shown. So thinking about that carefully, and we try not to ask authors to review, to redo their data unless there's something really fundamentally flawed with it. But you can make sort of minor adjustments and improvements. Then we check the discussion, and this is really important for making sense of what the results are. So does the discussion reflect the results? We don't want people to repeat the results in the discussion. It's really a reflection on a brief comment about what the overarching results are, and then talking about the results in relation to the literature that's out there and the implications for policy, practice and research, and also reporting the limitations. And that's a really important part for helping people when they're reading the research, because often the reader might not be an expert in the type of methods that are being presented, and so it's really important to point these out so people can understand if there's limitations. Oh, my screen's just gone black. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I just lost that there for a sec. And then we outline, look to see whether how the research question's been answered, particularly, in the conclusion, and sum up what the study results mean in relation to the other research. And we really want to check whether the conclusions and the discussion and the results are valid, and that people aren't stating the results of the study. So the final parts for the review is checking the accuracy, the number and the appropriateness of all the citations. Again, whether the tables and figures are relevant, accurate and good quality, and whether they're readable, whether they need, higher quality versions. Whether the title and abstract, we usually go back and read the title and abstract again after we've read the whole paper carefully, and check that it's relevant and representative of the overall content of the paper and the key points. And then think generally whether there's any general advice that you might want to give to improve the writing style, sentence or paragraph structure. And again, you don't need to go through and sort of provide detailed edits, but any general advice. So writing the review report, we usually it's really helpful for the author if you can structure it into overall comments and then major and minor comments. So the overall comments are what you think about the overall contribution of knowledge and the importance of the research. And then major comments are things, really fundamental issues that put into question the robustness and the understanding of the research paper. And then minor comments, there's usually the specific line-by-line issues that are really easy for the author and really helpful for the author to have those things in there. You can also make confidential comments to the editor in the review form. So if you have concerns about the ethical nature of the research or some of the research integrity issues that you're not sure about, you can include those in the comments to the editor. And there is an option to be able to communicate with the editor as well. So then, important things about writing your review. So it is really confidential, the review. We ask people don't share any of the information. Sometimes there is a little bit of mentoring that can go on if junior reviewers haven't reviewed very much before. There can be a senior editor that supports them during it, but you need to really let the editor know if you're planning to do that, and make sure that it definitely stays confidential between, in that mentorship relationship. Let the author know of the strengths as well as the weaknesses of the manuscript. This is, people have put a lot of work into these manuscripts and care deeply about them. Try and be empathetic and think about the feedback that you'd like to receive if you were submitting your paper, and provide the authors with advice about how to strengthen or revise the paper. And then again, reach out to the editors if you have any queries. There's a little example there. And another example here. So, the authors present, again, the positives of it, congratulated on the article, whether it provides a good overview, however, a few documents were missing, and going through all the sections like that we've got. I won't read all that out there. Some do's and don'ts. So what we don't want people to do is to, write a review that could be considered rude, insulting, or inappropriate. Try as much as you can not to be ambiguous, unclear, or confusing in your feedback. It can be really tricky sometimes for authors to understand and what the reviewers are saying, and could lead to them doing a whole lot of work and really steering the paper in the wrong way. Don't share the manuscript with others. Ask authors to reference your publications, as we said earlier. And, really, we don't want to request additional data analysis unless it's absolutely essential. And again, like Karen said earlier, it's really important not to use AI with reviews, because the problem is then it gets downloaded into the worldwide system. So it's really breaching that confidentiality. And then, of course, we really want to celebrate. It's a huge contribution to do a review. So you really important role in supporting Indigenous health and wellbeing researchers and researchers. So yes, Karen, you've put some suggestions down here, which is really nice to, give yourself a good pat on the back, maybe put on some dance music, make some moves, have a nice cup of tea, practice some mindfulness, have a good chat to a friend, and, maybe hug a tree or something like that, or pat your dog. I'll pass over to Karen to talk now about specific considerations for reviewing for the journal. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Kath. Would we say, Kath, overall the reviewers for the Lowitja Journal have been really fantastic, and we haven't had many people at all really do any don'ts. It's mostly do's, that people have done the right thing in the review. So while we put in those little don't things to think about not doing, mostly people are doing a fantastic job. So there are some specific Lowitja Journal considerations. So we are really keen to see authentic Indigenous involvement in research, and I know I peer review for other journals, and I see that consistently as an issue where you can't even see if the authors are Indigenous or not. And so I think the consider statement and the positionality statements are so helpful for the editors, but also the reviewers. So if you're reviewing for the Lowitja Journal, you're guaranteed to see that information, which is just wonderful actually to have. We're also interested in research that aligns with the IATSIS and NH and MRC Indigenous ethical guidelines, and also the relevant Indigenous ethics committees around Australia. And if you want to learn more about what those Indigenous ethics committees are, the Lowitja Journal has, Lowitja Institute actually has a really, really great, fairly recent article on Indigenous ethics committees. So you can learn all about what they do and where they're located. There's relevant localised Indigenous research principles and guidelines too now, and they're really worthwhile knowing and understanding for reviewing as well. And we're also interested in appropriate attribution of Indigenous knowledge within the manuscript, which is becoming more and more important. And I think there's probably some webinars coming up that are going to be about that as well. Next slide, Kath. If you're interested in further training around peer review, there is a peer review course that you can do, which can be really helpful if you really want to get really, really skilled at peer review. I think doing a course like that is a wonderful opportunity to learn more and add more to your lifelong learning. But I think also in my experience doing peer review training, it also really helps you as an author because you understand what peer reviewers are looking for. And so it can really help with your writing skills and getting published as well. And next slide. So thank you everyone on behalf of the Lowitja editorial team. All of the people who are in the editorial team are listed on the website, so you can go and see who's involved. There's some really, really wonderful editors involved, and we have really interesting editing meetings where lots and lots of questions get raised about Indigenous health research and publications. So thanks everyone, and questions?
Thank you so much to Professor Catherine Chamberlain and Karen Adams for an amazing presentation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your experiences. We'd love to open up the floor to questions. So if you have anything you'd like to ask or reflect on, please feel free to pop it in the Q&A function. We'd love to hear from you. Oh, we've got some already. Okay, we've got something from Anonymous. Often you're invited to review a paper because it's relevant to your field. If the authors have overlooked or ignored legitimately relevant work that you have published, wouldn't it be important to recommend that they include it?
That is a really tricky one. Yeah, I think it possibly could be. Yeah, it is hard in our field. Like it's sort of one of those things that we really encourage people to avoid. I guess if you're doing that, it's probably a discussion. Like it's something that maybe we'd look at as an editorial team, whether that is sort of a good thing to do. Karen, I don't know if you've got any thoughts or opinion. It is really tricky, I know, but
it is because it's a great question. It's a really, really great question. I think the main sort of tension in people recommending their own publications be cited is that it can be seen as a conflict of interest, and reviewers, and it also, reveals to people who you might be as well. So there's sort of all of that in the mix, and particularly Indigenous health, as Cass said, it's such a small field. My suggestion would be reaching out and getting advice from the editor, and there's that really useful kind of comments to the editor that you can put in, and you can say, look, I think these publications would be relevant for the author, but I just want to check in with you and make sure that, it's not creating a conflict of interest. And then you've declared the conflict of interest, which is best practice for that kind of doing that kind of work. Like we want to be transparent and useful and helpful for people, I think, as reviewers. But it's a fantastic question, and thanks for asking it.
We've got another question from Sarah asking, can you please go over why providing very positive feedback is not advised?
I don't think we said. I think think positive feedback is advised. Like we do want, I think that again, that's a really good question. But we do want to give people, constructive feedback and just be mindful of how people feel when they get their feedback. But it needs to be critical, like genuinely constructive and critical to help people improve their research. So not, while we can kind of, while we do want to put in about the strengths of the paper, we also really need to be rigorous in identifying ways that we think the paper can be improved. And then there's also, the authors don't necessarily accept all of the recommendations and suggestions that are made. There is an opportunity for them to make an argument about why they don't think, that the reviewer suggestion is one that they want to make. But they need to provide the rationale for that, and then the editor and the reviewer make a decision about whether that's justified. Karen, did you want to add to that?
I think that relates to if you're recommending you're going to reject the article, because it can be confusing for receivers of a review, for authors to be given some positive feedback about their, overly positive feedback, trying to be kind really and respectful to the authors. But that can also cause a bit of confusion because they're saying, well, the reviewer said this is a really good paper, or this had novel ideas, or things like that. And then they get confused. They're like, why are you really have they rejected it? Because, it's got positive feedback. So why is it being rejected? So I think it's just sort of being a little bit cautious about how you word things, particularly when you're rejecting articles, so that authors kind of, I don't know, you want to be kind, but you want to be sort of critical as well, as Kath suggested. And, sometimes finding the balance in that can be a little bit tricky. But definitely I've had PhD students who've submitted articles and they're like, well, the reviewer said it was really positive. Like, why my article is being, why is it being rejected? So it's sort of trying to find that balance, I guess. But good question.
We've got a question from Alison. Thank you very much to Kath and Karen. As a non-Indigenous reviewer, are there any additional things you would like us to consider, state, or include/not include?
I think another really good question. I think, often when non-Indigenous reviewers they do kind of note that they're non-Indigenous reviewers and coming from a non-Indigenous perspective. So that can be helpful to put that in. We usually, I think nearly always, we have an Indigenous and a non-Indigenous reviewer, so you don't need to stress too much about, not having the Indigenous lens on it. But I think the most important thing is to be, scientifically critical about it. If there's things that you don't understand about some of the Indigenous concepts that are being presented or explained, I think it's really helpful to point those out, because if you don't understand it, other readers might not too. So it's really, important that we try to be as clear as possible. And sometimes as an Indigenous writer, we might just assume that people understand these things. So it's really helpful to have, a different perspective that they might not be clear to everyone. I think there's some of the main things I can think of. Karen, you got more to add?
I think just being really aware when you're a reviewer that there are these two knowledge systems, and reading about those a little bit too can help, I think, with reviewing, because you're kind of a bit more, I don't know, added to your lifelong learning a little bit more about that sort of area. But generally, I would say in the reviews that I've seen, and Kathy, you've probably seen a lot more than me, people have been pretty open about being, I'm a non-Indigenous person, this is where my review is coming from, sort of, or is situated. And people are pretty thoughtful about the way that they're reviewing, I think.
We've got from Kylie, thank you both for your presentation. The self-determination edition sounds wonderful. I like that you have established that the reviewer understands the knowledge systems. Thank you, Kylie. We've got from Ross or Roz, I missed the start of the presentation, so apologies if I've missed the answer to this. How do you become a peer reviewer for a journal?
Oh, that's good.
Oh, that's a good question. So, well, we'd love to hear from you if you're interested. You could probably drop an email to the editor email. The way that we normally identify potential reviewers is we use a system called Scopus, where the article is uploaded, and we can, through the software that we have, we can identify people that have published similar articles in the field, and then we invite them to do that. And the other way that we identify them is through um, knowledge of the editor. So often the editors, we try as much as possible to assign the articles to an editor who's got, a degree of expertise, although we can't usually cover all types of specialist expertise, but, general expertise in that area. And then they might know people that they can send the articles to that would have the expertise in that area. It can be a little bit tricky because sometimes it feels like we're sending the request to review to all the same people because it's such a small field of people that we know, particularly Indigenous researchers. So, we have to try to balance that burden with sending it to people. So, yeah, we always love to hear from people that are interested in reviewing. So, do drop us an email. Yeah.
From Janet, thank you very much for an informative presentation. It is a similar question, how we go about recruiting or finding new peer reviewers and how often. So I guess, do we have any at the journal? Do we have any recruitment practices?
I think for me, becoming an editor, because it sort of all happens behind sort of like in the editorial space. And so as a reviewer and an author, I never really understood how, how did why did I get chosen to do this review? Why am I suddenly getting lots of reviews to see? And what I learned from being an editor is if you review and you review quickly, that actually shows up on the Scopus review kind of thing. So it says this person's done 20 reviews and they respond quickly, and so of course editors are like, that's the gold reviewer that I want. And so then you get like 20 kind of requests for reviewing in like a month sometimes, and depending on your field, of course. So it's a really interesting question actually about how reviewers are chosen. But I think if you're, like as Cass said, if you're interested in reviewing, email the journal and let us know. And we can, depending on your field, match you up to do some reviewing. Yeah, but they're really good questions.
The other thing I forgot to say is that we also invite the authors to recommend reviewers. So we kind of look at that, and as long as there's not a conflict of interest, and I think there's an option to, you know, say who you don't want to review your article as well. So there's that. I think the other thing that's important is to, get a bit of experience reviewing. So you might, if you're working with some senior people who get, dozens of requests every week to review articles, you might want to, let them know that, you're really interested in learning about reviewing and seeing whether you could, do one together, or and certainly get on and do that training, the Elsevier training and things like that really help.
Okay. From Kim, amazing presentation. It would be great to have a 2-page resource such as Deadly Tips for Reviewing or something like that that could be shared and encourage us young Jedis to review.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, we are always, as part of our sort of training webinars, we are always looking at resources and training documents and things that we can share. So thank you for the lovely suggestion, Kim, and we'll definitely think about that as a team.
We should be able to do that fairly easily
I
off the
think so,
presentation.
yes. We've
So
got
yeah,
lots of
great idea.
resources. So yeah, lovely. Thank you to Kath and Karen. If an article is sent to a non-Indigenous reviewer, will a second Indigenous reviewer also be used?
Yes, we definitely endeavour to do that. Yeah.
And I think what's good to remember too is that all of the editors are Aboriginal, or Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander or Torres Strait Islander, and so there's that sort of governance level happening as well. So there's Kath as the editor-in-chief and Moana, and then there's senior editors and junior editors as well, and so we all work together as a governance group to oversee the peer reviews that come in. So you will never, through the Lowitja Journal, you will never have an article review that hasn't had some oversight by an Indigenous person with experience in the field. So there's a lot of checks and balances that go on in the journal.
We do have Indigenous editors from all over the world as well, Canada, New Zealand, United States. Yep. Yeah. I can't remember an article where we haven't had an Indigenous reviewer. I think we've pretty much done that. Yeah.
Is there a criteria or checklist for allyship? How do allies know that they're being effective allies in this space, even with long-term relations with allies in this space?
I think just going to critical allyship principles, if you Google that, you'll find heaps of material on it. Just keeping an eye on those consistently is a really good thing to think about. And I think just being humble is really important. I mean, I think it's important for everybody to be humble, but just being willing to listen and listen carefully and educate yourself. All those sort of critical allyship principles that have been, very clever people have put together. I think just returning to those and reminding yourself about, am I following the principles is a really useful thing to do.
A question from, I think it's Stephen or Stefan. I am non-Indigenous and have recently become more involved in the Indigenous health space. Does my commercial involvement in the sector preclude me from being a peer reviewer?
That's a good question. I think it's good to declare any conflict of interest to the editor when you're taking it on. Maybe check, not quite sure what the commercial interest is, but certainly before accepting the article, if you're concerned that there might be a conflict of interest, it'd be good to just check in with the editor and make a decision based on that.
Yeah, definitely for an article that I was involved in reviewing, there was one of the reviewers raised a conflict of interest and checked in to see whether that would have excluded them from reviewing. So yeah, I think it's appreciated that people do that.
Yeah. Essentially what we're trying to do with the conflict of interest thing is really think about whether it's going to hinder your ability to provide a solid, unbiased review. Yeah.
Have you ever seen or reviewed conceptual articles, such as articles aimed at creating Indigenous theory? Any advice for that kind of revision?
That's a good one. I think that there is material written about developing theory and ways in which theory should be developed. This is not my area of expertise, just putting it out there. But I know that there is quite a bit written about theory making, like how you actually go about doing that. So I think if there are articles that involve kind of trying to develop conceptual theory or frameworks, I think there is a body of literature about sort of best practice in that area around, and even, theory relates to knowledge systems. So even about working with Indigenous knowledge, how you do that respectfully and meaningfully. So there is a body of work that can help reviewers review that material. But Cass, do you want to comment on how, if a paper like that was submitted, where it might fit in the journal in terms of the article?
I think that's a really good question. We haven't had any articles submitted like that that I can recall to this stage. I think we've had quite a lot of submissions, probably over 100 submissions and 54 articles published at the moment. Yeah, I think we would, ask reviewers to look at the knowledge, as you say, about, how you develop a conceptual, how a rigorous theory comes together and what are the kind of principles for that. Yeah, I think that's good advice, Karen.
From Ken, as a researcher, I am looking to add impact to evidence presented to mainstream organisations and government departments. Thank you for the Martin N reference. Any other tips are welcome. So thank you, Ken. Alison, thank you. Very helpful. Some comments about lots of learning by doing. As a non-Indigenous reviewer, I would be interested in co-reviewing alongside my Indigenous colleagues. Is this a process that is practiced in peer reviewing for the journal?
I guess,
hmm.
do you want to go, Kath?
Oh, you go, Karen. Yeah.
So generally what happens is we try and get 2 or more reviewers. I've had up to 3 reviewers respond to provide review, and they're invited separately. So it's not a collaborative peer review process. You would be peer reviewing individually. So if you were peer reviewing, and there was an Indigenous person peer reviewing as well, a non-Indigenous and an Indigenous person peer reviewing, you wouldn't do it collaboratively together. You'd do it individually and provide independent reviews, because I guess what we're trying to see is what are people's different perspectives on the article, and what are they picking up individually.
Mm-hmm. Because it does bring up that issue of confidentiality. I think, it might be something we need to discuss a bit as an editorial team too. It hasn't kind of come up before, but it's a bit similar to the mentoring, I guess, if we're saying that people can, you can mentor people in doing a peer review if it's just one other person. I think that's a really good question, and we'll probably discuss that with the editorial board and the publishing house as well, just to check, that it wouldn't be breaching any rules that we have.
We do have a few comments saying that people love the idea of collective reviewing or co-reviewing alongside elders and other things like that. So definitely something that people are interested in exploring.
Yeah, good point.
From Susie, thank you so much. Do you know if there is any guidance for non-Lowitja Institute journals to ensure that they have articles reviewed as well?
Author guidelines, you mean? Sorry, you've just read that out, Christy. We do know people are looking at the Lowitja Journal author guidelines and adopting some of the things that we've included around Indigenous research, so having Indigenous authors using the consider statement and things like that. So I think it's increasing, we're really trying to pave the way here and learn, we're learning as we're going too. It's a new journal and we're trying to do things differently. So, it's an ongoing process of improvement for us, and we're hoping that, there's certainly other people, other journals learning from us as well.
Hi, Kath and Karen. For a non-Indigenous journal, we asked that the review process be done in person. It was an Indigenous author and an Indigenous reviewer. The reviewer then uploaded the review via the usual online process. Is something like this offered to junior researchers in Lowitja? Cheers, Chantal.
Mhm.
I think that question sort of relates to the mentorship program we're
Mm.
trying to begin. I think, Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that people often do, I think. Again, we just really need to impress the importance of confidentiality. It is a little bit of a grey area doing that. So it's something that, if that's what you're going to do, we'd ask that you check in with the editor and let them know and have a discussion about that.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think again we probably need to, based on this, have a real discussion about it with our editorial board, and maybe what we might try and do once we've had a discussion about that is include it on some guidelines or the website or something. That two-pager that was suggested, which was a great idea.
We've got a comment from Sky, loving Professor Adams' suggestions of hugging a tree as a self-care option. So thank you for that, Karen. Such an informative presentation, much appreciated. Uh, my previous question is to enable remote Indigenous research colleagues who are very involved and capable in resource, but would not have the skills and confidence to review independently. So I think it's going back to
Mm.
questions about, again, co-reviewing,
Yep.
and having,
Yep. That makes sense. Yep.
yes.
Yep.
So I don't know if there's
We can.
anything else you wanted to add specific to that.
I think the message is loud and clear that we, as an editorial team, need to have a chat about that and think about.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've got a lot of amazing as well comments about the presentation, Kath and Karen, about how wonderful it is and how informative it was. So that's always lovely to hear. We've also got several questions about people having access to slides. So all of our webinars are recorded and they will be available on the Lowitja Journal website as well as the Lowitja Institute's YouTube channel. So you can absolutely revisit today's discussion, catch up on any that you may have missed, because we did have a few people say that they'd missed a little bit, and the slides will be able to be seen in that recording. So usually we upload that around about a week later, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you again to Professor Kath Chamberlain and Professor Karen Adams for such a thoughtful, insightful presentation. I think everyone got a lot out of it. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Potential. Okay, buddy, I'll be 2 seconds. Sorry, guys, the challenges of school holidays. Any potential reviewers, please feel free to email us at editor@lowitja.org.au with some information about your background, your areas of expertise. We would love to hear from you and see if there are any reviewing options for you in the future. Also a reminder that we have our next webinar at 10 a.m. on the 6th of August, and this will be a presentation by Professor Lester Rigney around his Indigenous work. So be sure to look out for the promotion of that and mark it in your calendars. And thank you again, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you all next time. And thank you.